The hall was filled with music, laughter, and the sweet scent of roses, but in the far corner of the room, where the light barely reached, sat a young woman in a wheelchair, staring at her trembling hands. Her white wedding dress shimmered softly under the golden lights, but she couldn't feel its fabric against her legs. The laughter around her wasn't hers. The tears she held back weren't of joy. A few hours earlier, she was supposed to walk down the aisle, to the man she thought would stand by her forever. But instead, she sat alone, paralyzed not just by the accident that had taken her legs, but by the cruelty of rejection that followed. Her groom had walked away, telling her he couldn't spend a life with someone who would slow him down. The words replayed in her mind like a curse. Guests whispered. Her father stood frozen, humiliated and heartbroken. And there she sat, Lena, the poor bride everyone pitied, left behind before the vows were even spoken. If you believe that kindness, second chances and true love still exist in this world, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness of Americans. Your support helps keep these stories of hope and humanity alive for the world to see. Lena hadn't always been like this. Once she was a spirited young woman who loved dancing in the rain, chasing butterflies, and sketching the colors of the sunset. She had dreams, simple ones, to be a teacher, to have a family, to love and be loved in return. But one rainy night changed everything. A car skidded on a wet road, swerving toward her as she crossed the street. The sound of metal, glass, and screams was the last thing she remembered before waking up in a hospital bed, her legs motionless beneath the sheets. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive, but to Lena, it didn't feel like luck. It felt like the beginning of a slow, painful goodbye to everything she'd ever known. Her fiancé, Ryan, had promised to stand by her through it all. At first, he visited often, bringing flowers, forcing smiles, saying all the right words. But as the months dragged on and Lena's recovery stalled, his visits became shorter, his eyes colder. The night before their wedding, he confessed he couldn't do it. He said he felt trapped, that he wanted a normal life. And so, the next morning, when everyone waited for the bride and groom, only she showed up. She wanted to keep her promise, even if he didn't. The pitying glances and whispered gossip at the ceremony burned into her soul. After that day, Lena disappeared from everyone's sight. She sold her dress to pay for rent, moved into a tiny, old apartment on the city's edge, and began surviving on disability checks and cheap instant meals. She stopped painting. She stopped looking in mirrors. The world had turned her into something invisible, a burden in a chair. Nights were the hardest. The silence of her room reminded her of the laughter she once had. Sometimes she would stare at her useless legs and wonder if love would ever find her again, or if she was destined to live and die in that lonely corner of the city, unseen and unloved. But life, in its mysterious kindness, was about to bring her someone who saw more than what others did. His name was Ethan, a single father in his late 30s, with tired eyes that had seen too much pain but still carried a softness that the world hadn't managed to break. He worked 2 jobs to raise his 7-year-old daughter Lily, after his wife had passed away from cancer. They lived modestly but lovingly, sharing laughter over simple meals and bedtime stories about courage and hope. One chilly afternoon, as Lena struggled to wheel herself up a steep ramp near the public park, her groceries tipped over, scattering apples and bread across the pavement. People passed by, pretending not to see. But one small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, the lady dropped her food." Ethan turned and ran toward her, his daughter close behind. He picked up the groceries gently, his large hands trembling slightly as he offered a warm smile. "Here, let us help you." For the first time in months, Lena looked into someone's eyes and didn't see pity, only kindness. Lily smiled wide, holding out an apple as if returning a treasure. Something inside Lena melted. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had looked at her that way, with genuine warmth and no judgment. That day, they sat on a park bench and talked. Ethan learned about her accident, her lost wedding, and the life she'd been forced to live since. He didn't interrupt or look uncomfortable. He just listened. He told her about Lily, about losing his wife, and how he still struggled to cook pancakes without burning them. They laughed together, softly at first, then with a kind of freedom neither of them had felt in years. Before leaving, Lily hugged Lena and said, "You're pretty." It was a simple, innocent phrase, but to Lena it was everything. Days turned into weeks. Ethan began visiting Lena often, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes just coffee and conversation. He'd help her with groceries, fix her leaky faucet, and make her laugh with silly stories about his daughter. But more than anything, he made her feel seen. She began painting again, inspired by the warmth he brought into her life. He never treated her as the woman in the wheelchair. To him, she was just Lena, the woman with a heart too big for her pain. Still, a part of her resisted. She had been hurt too deeply before. She feared that one day, Ethan too would see her chair and decide she wasn't worth the trouble. But every time she tried to distance herself, Ethan would do something that shattered her doubts, like showing up in the rain just to check if she was okay, or bringing Lily to surprise her with a hand-painted card that said, "You're our sunshine." Slowly, the cracks in Lena's heart began to heal. Then one day, while they were at the park, Lily asked innocently, "Daddy, why doesn't Miss Lena come live with us?" Ethan froze. Lena's heart raced. She tried to laugh it off, but Ethan turned to her, his eyes filled with something deeper than words. "Maybe she should," he said quietly. At first, Lena refused. She didn't want to be anyone's burden. But Ethan looked at her with gentle defiance and said, "You're not a burden, Lena. You're a blessing we didn't know we needed." Tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't a grand proposal, not the kind she'd once dreamed of, but it was real. It was love, raw and unpretentious. Ethan helped her move in. Their little home became filled with laughter again. Lena cooked what she could from her chair, while Ethan and Lily danced around the kitchen, burning toast and spilling juice, making beautiful messes of ordinary days. Slowly, she realized she didn't need legs to stand tall. She stood in their love, their acceptance, their joy. Months later, in a small backyard surrounded by wildflowers, Ethan asked Lena to marry him. She cried before she could answer, and when she did, it was through tears that carried the weight of every rejection she'd ever endured. This time, she wasn't a poor, paralyzed bride. She was a woman loved beyond her scars, chosen for her heart. Lily held the ring box, giggling, as Ethan placed it on Lena's trembling hand. The neighbors who had once whispered now smiled through tears as they watched the ceremony. When Ethan kissed her, it wasn't just a kiss of love. It was a vow to rewrite the story she thought had ended long ago. Together, they proved that love doesn't need perfection, only compassion, and that's how a broken woman and a weary man found in each other what the world had denied them, a home built on kindness, faith, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness of Americans. Let the world see that kindness is still alive, that broken people can still find healing, and that love, real love, sees beyond all limits.